We are excited to hear from our featured speaker, Commissioner Rachel Arfa. And she's got an incredible bio. I'm not allowed to do that, though, because we have a very special guest who virtually joining us who would like to introduce the commissioner. So please welcome our great mayor, Lori Lightfoot.
Hello, everyone. I'm Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot, and I have the great honor of introducing Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities Commissioner Rachel Arfa to you, the City Club audience. Commissioner Arfa is working hand in glove with my administration to make Chicago the most accessible city in the nation. She's the first deaf person to serve as a cabinet member in the mayor's cabinet and is the highest ranking deaf person serving in municipal government nationwide. Since assuming her role in 2020, Commissioner Arfa has improved the accessibility of city services by introducing access officers in every city department and sister agency. She was also integral in creating the new role of Technology Accessibility Compliance Officer in order to support our ongoing digital accessibility efforts. Commissioner Arfa is also someone who knows what it means to let community lead. So, for example, through her work with the COVID Vaccine Disability Working Group, she worked with our Department of Public Health to ensure that educational materials and operational processes were informed by feedback from people living with disabilities. Commissioner Arfa has also partnered with local and federal leaders to ensure disability resources reach victims of gun violence, and most recently worked with Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events to create a mural on the outside wall of the MOPD field office. This mural, which will be created by Sam Kirk, a noted muralist in our city, will be informed by listening sessions with the disability community. So above all, Commissioner Arfa is a fierce advocate for the disability community. And another example, she recognized the gap in supports for job seekers with disabilities and worked with everyone in our administration to launch the MOPD Career Center on July 26th of this year. The Career Center, funded by a $1.2 million investment, provides a central resource to help residents with disabilities access job and career opportunities, and works with employers to increase inclusive hiring practices and create pathways to employment and opportunities. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have to tell you, I am beyond grateful for Commissioner Arfa's steadfast leadership and look forward to our continued collaboration as we make this city as accessible as possible. So thank you, and now it's my great pleasure to turn things over to MOPD Commissioner Rachel Arfa.
And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Commissioner Rachel Arfa of the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, and I'm really honored to have this opportunity from the City Club to speak in front of you today. First, I want to thank Mayor Lightfoot for that incredible introduction. It's such an honor and a privilege to work for Mayor Lightfoot, and the work that I do every day would not be possible without her advocacy and support. She championed out of our accessibility work across the city. I cannot do this work without Mayor Lightfoot. Yeah, I want to thank so many people who are here today. First, I want to thank First Lady Amy Asherman for being here, and also my fellow commissioners, Commissioner Morris of the Department of Housing, and then Commissioner Chris Brown of the Public Library, and Commissioner Brown spoke here last week, so he's been very helpful in helping me to prepare for today. So I appreciate all your words. And you also had a fantastic event last week with the Library Foundation. I also want to thank Parks CEO Rosa Escarino, who's also here. And thank the Chicago Public Library, Peace Suburban Bus, and Access Living for their support in bike tables for today's event. And, I also want to thank my mother, who I think I've already figured out before I start that she's my biggest cheerleader. So I'm very lucky to have my mom at the support of so many friends and family here, and the support of my brother and my sister, Rosie, and my dad, who passed away 12 years ago, but he's always in our house. But I think Representative Ian Williams will be here too. Thank you. And I also want to thank my speech therapists who I've worked with throughout most of my life, Minty Kobamis, for being here, who I spent many hours with her learning how to talk and hear and pronounce words. And Minty was not only a speech therapist, she was also a mentor, and I still think of her advice every day. So thank you, Minty. Finally, I want to thank my team at the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, and thank you for helping us to do this work every single day. Thanks to you, we are working to make the city of Chicago the most accessible city in the nation. So before I start, I want to thank the City Club of Chicago for their work in making today's event more accessible. So you will see next to me in America Sign Language interpreter. You also see captioning about the screen. So our sign language interpreter next to me, Jen McElroy, and then we have Kathy Bacon, who's providing the captioning from the back of the room. We are in a wheelchair accessible venue, and this is just one of the ways that we can continue to make our spaces more accessible. And I really appreciate the City Club support and commitment to this. So before I begin, I want to share with you a moment. So in 1883, my mom took me with her to work. She introduced me to her boss. Her boss was Mayor Harold Washington. It was 1983. It was the first day of the Chicago Farmers Market. And I remember two things from that day. Number one, as a deaf parent who struggled to communicate and had to ask adults how to take the time to look at me so I could read their lips and communicate with me. I appreciated how Mayor Washington, you can see this in this picture, he crouched down to my level to make eye contact with me, and he greeted me holding out his hand. And I learned the power of that moment in the time that he took to do that. The second thing I learned from that day was about the value of public service from Mayor Washington, but also from my mother, Nancy Blue, who, as was mentioned before, she worked for 5 years. And through both of them, I learned that about the power of city government to provide innovative solutions to make people's lives better. So I think to talk about another moment, and this is from April 2016. And in the first picture, I am standing on the steps of the United States Supreme Court with 11 other deaf and hard of hearing attorneys as part of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Bar Association. And this is the first time the deaf lawyer have ever been sworn into the Supreme Court bar. We are all leaders across the country in the different fields that we practice in. At the time, I was working as an attorney for equality in disability rights, and I'm so glad to see my former colleagues for being here is support today. We have many others who work in government, who work in private practice. But one thing that we have in common was that each one of us had our own struggles in trying to navigate the world growing up and had to advocate for communication access throughout our entire lives just to get access to the places that we were in and understand what was happening. In fact, the doctor who diagnosed me here in class when I was 18 months old told my peers I would not be able to talk. I would not be able to read past a third grade reading number, and I would not have a normal life. Obviously, my peers did not listen to that doctor. So there's no photos allowed in the Supreme Court. So this is a drawing from the illustrator for the Supreme Court. What you see is that we are rising to stand up as our names are called to be sworn in. You will see in America sign language interpreter who's interpreting, and then you also see one of our members, me, looking at an iPad where real-time captioning was being provided from another part of the room. This was a very big deal to have an iPad in the courtroom because there was a ban on technology. So that was one of the many things that we had to negotiate just to be able to participate in this ceremony. None of these accommodations was set up for us. And we had made a request to the court to say we need some accessibility to be able to participate. We are attorneys, we are members in good standing. We passed our bar exams, it met other criteria, but the court's initial response was, no, we're not going to provide that. Well, we had a pretty powerful group as a group of deaf attorneys. So we all worked together to inform the court and to make it and they eventually agreed to provide this accommodation. But when I wanted to see, would you see these pictures, then we were not just given these accommodations, we had to fight for them, and we had to advocate for them. This may sound unusual to you, but for myself, if there's so many people with disabilities, this is the common experience that happens every single day. And I've always had to ask or request accommodation or accessibility just to be able to participate in many things throughout our life. And when I was in kindergarten through 12th grade, I was the one who had to teach my teachers how to accommodate me in the classroom through my whole life. So I really had to tell the teachers, I'm deaf and I need you to not talk to the blackboard. I need you to help me make sure that everybody else in the classroom also follows best practices so then I could be there and participate. I now realize 2 weeks, I realize how much information I missed out on through my education. What that didn't help me was that I loved to read. I learned how to read when I was 3. My love of books helped me to fill in many of the gaps on my own. And then I also realized how much emotional labor I spent at trying to access my own education. And I was very tired of that, and I was trying to retrieve and process information. When the pandemic first started, many people complained about Zoom fatigue. Well, for people who are deaf and hard of hearing, and for people who have different disabilities, there is a fatigue that is involved with navigating the world through your disability. I didn't realize the difference until I went to college at the University of Michigan, where for the first time, I see somebody saying Michigan, come through. it was the first time in my life that I didn't have to fight for my services. The University of Michigan said to me, whatever you need for your classes, for your extracurricular activities, no problem, we'll give it to you. And that was a certain moment that had an impact, because then I no longer had to spare that energy and try just to get access to my classes. And I instead dove into extracurricular activities where I learned and built my leadership skills because of that decision to provide me with whatever access I needed. So imagine if you had this kind of interaction for every single part of your life, whether it's transportation, work, going to see an event after work, or other tasks that you need to do. One of the solutions to doing that is to be proactive about providing accessibility rather than waiting for a person with a disability to ask for and proactively provide it. Other people know you're ready to provide that. This is emotional labor the people with disabilities do. It is a cost to doing this emotional labor. We talk about emotional labor with other marginalized groups. We recognize that emotional labor. For example, there are articles about how married women end up doing more of the housework, more of the child care. We recognize that there's an extra effort there. Another example is after the murder of George Floyd, there was starting to be an awareness that white people should not rely on people of color to learn more, only that we needed to learn more about anti-racism, and in connection to that, this year, anti-racism books shot up 2,000% because we were recognizing there are other ways to take out that understanding of how we can build an anti-racist society. Even when LGBTQIA awareness pronouns are becoming more widely used, if people are learning more about, for example, why it's important to use your pronoun. For example, my pronoun is she, hers. I should have said that at the beginning. Understanding and learning more about gender and sexual identity. So we've recognized the efforts that we all need to take in some of those examples. We do not yet have this recognition when it comes to people with disabilities. People with disabilities usually have the burden of explaining what we need and how it needs to be made accessible and explaining those basic needs. And this is the type of work that marginalized groups do, including people with disabilities. There is some recognition in the disability community of this. For example, there is a concept among people who may have chronic fatigue called spoons. And the concept is that you have 12 spoons in any given day, but you have to use those spoons, you prioritize what you want to do for that day. And if there is something that ends up taking more time, you may use up more spoons that day and not have enough for other tasks. So that's one concept. Another concept is among different kind of hearing people, your eyes get really tired after trying to bother you participate in conversation all the time. But what I think that does come out of this is that it means that people with disabilities have developed other skill sets as a result of having a disability. For example, people with disabilities are some of the best problem solvers around because we're also great at time management because we have to coordinate our schedule with different accessibility needs. We're also very good at negotiation and advocacy. We got a lot of practice at that. people with disabilities, also very good at using technology to increase access. Yeah, some of the technologies that we have used have become adopted by the rest of us, by mainstream society. For example, the first one I'll talk about is captioning. This box here is the first captioning decoder that my family bought in 1980 because the TV did not have captions. Yeah, so they had to hook up the brown machine that's at the top to the TV. There were only a couple of TV shows. I was young at that time, so there were only 2 cartoons that had captions at the time. And I arranged my schedule so that I could watch them at 6 a.m. But that's how much was not accessible at the time. And then another version came out, which is the black version, and I used to take that with me to sleepover parties. So then I could watch movies with my friends, and my friends' poor parents had to spend all this time connecting these box to their TVs. And then in 1890, a law was passed to require captioning decoders in every TV. So that means that most of you never had to worry about this kind of box just to be able to turn out the captions. Today, you see captions here, so I know that many of you are using the captions here today. When you watch a video, up to 80% of people watch videos with captions, whether on TV or at the phone. But we started using that in the 80s. Text messaging is another example. Text messaging was invented to help that people communicate with each other. Now, my brother uses text messaging so that he doesn't have to talk to my mom on the phone. Then also people with disabilities have been using speech-to-text software for a decade. For example, tracker speaking and jazz. But now I think everybody in this room knows the words, "Hey Siri." But people with disabilities have been using that to meet a number of needs for years. We all know the metaverse and curb cuts, which help provide more accessible sidewalks, but that means that everybody uses them, not just wheelchair users or people with other physical disabilities. And then, of course, another example of technology is accessible buses. Adapt Chicago and a number of other disability rights advocates advocating for bus systems to be accessible. And today, CTE buses are now 100% accessible. And that also includes a number of other It then also includes a number of our other transportation systems, like paid suburban bus, which has a number of accessible vehicles too. So now that has become the predominant type. So as you're trying to figure out what the next big technology is, next to the disability community, we're probably already using it. We are early adopters of these tools. If these examples approve. And yet, when we look to the disability community and employment, we don't quite see these high numbers. So the employment rate of people with disabilities continues to be 18.1% compared to 63% of people without disabilities, even though the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed 32 years ago. Unemployment is also higher among people with disabilities who are Black and Latinx than who are white and Asian people with disabilities. So we still have more work to do. And then people with disabilities, many are more likely to be entrepreneurs. A part of that is after because of the barriers in accessing employment. Government is an area where there's not as much difference, so government seems to be a place of more opportunity. I think it's also important to define disability. So the definition of disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act is a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits more than one major life activity, or you have a history of such impairment, or you have a garden and having such an impairment. It's a very broad definition because it means a major life activity means it is difficult for you to communicate, to breathe, to move, to care for yourself, to sleep, in many activities. Disability is also, it looks in its different. Disability is visible, is invisible, is acquired, including people who may become disabled from gun or community violence. And disability is likely undercounted. I spent a lot of time looking at the data. And I think that there are still so many gaps where someone who may not identify as having a disability is not counted, who other people with disabilities are not always included. One of the things then, disability is the only group that anyone could become a member of at any time. There are a number of assumptions about disability that keep us from making progress in terms of disability employment and a greener understanding. First, there's an assumption about what disability means in its often because of a limited life experience in knowing somebody with a disability. Television media does not help because there's a lack of authentic representation of characters with disabilities in TV media, and that's a huge opportunity that needs to improve. But then people often rely on maybe assumptions they have, or when else happens, I think, is then people may be afraid to ask questions and they become uncomfortable, but rather than leaning into that discomfort, the opposite happens. If that engagement doesn't happen, and the example is now sometimes people can't understand me. Instead saying, I'm sorry, could you say that again? Which I don't, because it tells me then you're trying to communicate with me. People just bluff the way to ignore when I'm saying, but that's even worse. I would much rather that you engage and say, what did you say? Or could you say that again? And I experienced that a lot in Anchor Town where people are faking. But this discomfort is what holds us back. I really encourage you, if you have this bias or a discomfort, lean into that discomfort and explore why you have that discomfort. You doing the work will help to create opportunities for so many people with disabilities. There are also assumptions about the skill set of people with disabilities being represented in just about every field. When I still meet people who can't believe that I'm a deaf commissioner. And there are people who work in every field in question, someone based at their disability. And then another assumption is about reasonable accommodation. There are assumptions about providing reasonable accommodation in the workplace, in reasonable accommodation, including providing any accessibility or modification to the process so then a person with disability had equal better access to the benefits and privileges of employment. There's an assumption that accommodations are expensive. Many accommodations do not cost anything. For example, modified work schedule, work from home, which I think many of us have done in the last 24 months, other taking breaks, other modification, and then many other accommodations, maybe of more time purchase, assistive technology. For example, there are other accommodations that may cost more, but there's still an assumption about how they need to be provided. So that's an area where I think then having a conversation. This is also called the interactive process. Debate will help to clear that up. I have to talk about another accommodation that has been in the news, which is from Pennsylvania Senate candidate Betterman, who has been criticized for using captioning to help her participate in an interview. He's been judged for using captioning. But and I think that there's this story hit, but David Perry wrote a great article about this in the New York Times. But he's a man who's saying, I now have this disability because of my stroke, and I'm using captioning. And this report made him seem like less than because he's using a tool. And by the way, many of our platforms have captioning, automatic captioning, so that was a free accommodation. But he should not be charged for using that. In fact, he should be recognized for saying, here's another tool to help me to make sure that I got things correct. He's working harder to make sure that he gets the question in the information presented correct. There's somebody who could hear it is sort of multitasking. And the other question was, well, there's no captioning at the United States Senate. Well, I got news for you. When I worked in the Senate, I covered 20 years ago, every single Senate proceeding had captioning. So let's talk about how we are navigating the pandemic. So this is where we are now. We have seen that the job market has blown wide open. There are more jobs now than available workers for them. So we have really shifted. And then there are new practices about working from home, flexibility in hours, scheduling. So I became commissioner in July of 2020, and I was watching this labor force creating an abundance of opportunities. But then I also started getting phone calls from companies that were saying to me, we would love to hire people with disabilities. Where could we go? I checked with my staff, who told me that the number one phone call to the mayor's office for people with disabilities over the years has been, I'm a person with a disability. I need to find a job. Could you help me? So Mayor Lightfoot and I started creating a solution to this last summer to create a brand new career center to help people with disabilities get jobs. And we went to City Council to ask for $1.2 million in funding. And I'm so excited to share with you that last Friday, we had a ribbon cutting for the event. This is also National Disability Employment Awareness Month. I cannot think of a better time to open our career center. We opened up in July 26 virtual services, and then on Friday we opened up our physical space. In that short amount of time, we already have 65 clients, and 10 people have already got their jobs. And I can't wait to see more people get jobs. We had 7 interviews last week, so I know that number is going to go up very quickly. I'm looking at my career center team. So who do we serve? We serve Chicagoans who identify as having a disability, who brought to the career job, and who are over age 16. And then we also serve senior college students with a disability who are looking for a job. And then we also provide, not only do we provide help finding a job, but also career readiness, working with the radio, resume, sending schools, doing practice interviews, and providing counseling at a reasonable accommodation process, and talking about disability disclosure, which is a very big concern for many people with disabilities in whether to disclose a disability when you apply for a job. There's no right of work. Yes. We also are investing in working with employers to create inclusive hiring practices. So we will work with employers to identify candidates for open job opportunities, provide technical assistance, and work with you to increase accessibility. hiring practices, for example, providing how to provide reasonable accommodation. But we need Chicago employers to help us advance disability employment. We need employers to participate. If there are some strategies that you could put into place immediately, you can add over time. If you see these strategies used throughout the city and the nation. So here's a few pictures from Friday. So Mayor Lightfoot is so committed center to advance disability employment. And this is Byron, this man who's re-vacating. He's the first person to get a job through a career center. He experienced, he fucked up. He experienced a number of barriers trying to get a job at other places across the city, and he came to us. And one of our staff members worked very closely with him to help him fill out an application. And shortly after, he got a job at Untitled Chapter. And then this is what a career center looks like. So we have a private office for counselors to meet with clients. And we thought that private counseling space was so important so that people could feel free to talk about their disability. And then, to address the barriers of the digital divide, we provide a computer station upgraded with accessible technology so that people with disabilities who may not have access to assistive technology could come to us center and use them to apply for jobs, it could any other assistance. And then this is a great staff here of the Career Center who will be working so hard to make this a success. So I would love to talk to you about strategies and how we could work together to advance disability employment. For example, we find it key to work with both your DIA and human resources recruiters. I see that in many companies there's a connection between DIA work, but then also training a human resources team who's at the front line to make sure that they are providing accessibility, to make sure that they are appropriately looking at candidates' qualification and helping to guide candidates through the process. Another approach here is to look at the interviewing process. A one-to-one interview is not the only way to do an interview. We have seen companies like Microsoft at the person modify their interview process so that applicants with disabilities could come out to the company and provide and have a meeting and get to know the managers and learn more about their job while at the company rather than in a formal one-to-one interview setting. In one example, then I think of is from University Medical Center, where Cabot Irvine works, and he's done a great job at putting together different information and resources in representation of people with disabilities who work at the company, along with information on how to access services at the hospital, acknowledging that we may interact with an organization in multiple ways. Another example is to look at a job description and make sure that you're not unintentionally screening out people with disabilities. For example, many desk jobs say you have to be able to lift 20 pounds. That's not something that actually happens. It may not be something that's required or requiring a driver's license. That is an ongoing effort that we are working on. Make sure that you provide information about feasible accommodations. Make sure that it's easy to find that your HR staff understand how to provide that. And then paid internships are a great way for people to get experience at the job, build their experience throughout their career. But you also want to make sure that as an employer, you provide any accommodations needed, because that has been a barrier for people with disabilities. Another strategy is to add sub-minimum wage to the 40C waiver. This is something that Mayor Lightfoot has put such a leader on in the 2019 budget pass. 2019 budget, Mayor Lightfoot included a rule that sub-minimum wage must end in the city of Chicago by 2022. Sub-minimum wage is where Chicago was one of 2 large cities to take this action in 2019. This year, we're starting to see action from the federal government through the Ability One program, which is put into place a rule banning sub-minimum wage in the Ability One program, which goes into effect Wednesday. So Chicago was one of the early adopters of this, thanks to me and I found. Sub-minimum wage at harmful because it created this idea that it was okay to pay people with disabilities piecemeal wages for doing tasks, which connects to an idea that it's okay to pay people with disabilities less than some of without a disability. This takes a strong stand against that, and many Chicago organizations have already taken significant steps away from sub-minimum wage. Other opportunities of retention, and we want to make sure that to help you retain employees with disabilities when we are in WCs, when the Salisbury maybe a supervisor, a manager moves to another part of the company or leaves, a person with a disability may not rely on that manager to be accommodating his supporter to be that future manager. Are still aware of those practices and to set up new rules for everybody to follow so that everybody understands that. Because we see a lot of change happen with the manager who was supportive leaves without telling the other new manager that they are also expected to follow these practices. We also want to encourage advancement of people with disabilities. We don't want to just get people jobs. We want to create career opportunities and advancement opportunities. And then employee resource groups have been a great way to build a sense of community. Here in the city of Chicago, we're creating our first employee resource group, and it was for people with disabilities because we want to be able to bring a whole sound of work. And the theme was to, it's called Disability Forward Chicago, and it's just an important start in building that sense of community. Mentoring is such an important way to help provide support and guidance. The Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities worked on a mentoring program with Microsoft with Aspire Chicago. And we told the mentors and mentees just meet once a month. But they enjoyed it so much that we found they were actually meeting closer to once a week. If somebody got a job through not at Microsoft, but that support may have helped them to get a job faster. So that's another way that we will work with employers. And it's important to be an ally and an advocate, which I know there's so many of you in this room. And we've discussed the meaning of allies and advocates. An ally is somebody who will support you while you're in the room. An advocate is someone who will support you and advocate for you when you're not in the room. So we have a number of resources here. We are ready to work with businesses and companies. We would love your help at that. So in closing, I want to leave you with, so we did work with an artist named Sam Kong to create a mural of our building. He did the 60-piece mural with a number of pieces. This is just one of them. And I see this as the future. This is where we are going for all of these professions. If you Google any of these images, it's really hard to find a person with a disability who's a teacher. It's hard to find a person with a disability who's a doctor, who works in the computer field. We want to make this more widespread and accepted so that when you look at this picture, it's not so unusual. I'm going to describe first this picture first. There's a man with a amputated arm, and he's standing in front of a blackboard, and he's finding the words pride, and there's a young boy who's watching him. The center figure is a woman with headphones who is surrounded by computer programming language, and she looks like she's a computer programmer. And then the final image is a doctor wearing a white coat, sitting in a wheelchair, treating 2 patients. This picture is where we're going. We want more of these opportunities. And I invite you to join me in doing this work. Thank you. Thank you.
Go anyway. Thank you. I did not want the applause to stop, so I wanted to allow her to experience that whole applause of which she was certainly worthy. We have so many questions, but I am very cognizant of the time. And while I'd love to spend the entire afternoon with you all, I don't know that you all want to spend the entire afternoon with us. So, Commissioner, this was so enlightening. And there's so much that I have to say, but I'm not going to say it because we're running behind time. I do want to ask one question. I'm going to look at the others. You answered a couple of the other questions. So people who did send in questions early, please know that a couple of your answers were answered during her speech. But there is one question from Eileen Dordek. Eileen, are you here? Oh, she's there. Okay. I know how important the arts are to you as a commissioner. Have you been able to have an impact on accessibility to the arts in Chicago?
Thank you so much, Eileen, for your question, for being here. So the arts have been something that I've been very passionate about. This is how one of the ways that I got started in advocacy was I started with one dinner at a time to work with them at providing accessibility, for example, open caption performance, and I experienced that work working in collaboration with many other advocates, including the Chicago Cultural and Accessibility Consortium. And there are so many more people working at it. In this role, I am just so excited that I've been able to connect disability in the arts, because I really believe that the arts is what way that we could transform attitudes about disability. For example, this mural here that you see is just one way, and I invite you to come and look at it. It is in the same building where Career Center is at 2102 West Acton, the Central West Community Center. There are 60 pieces. It includes a poem from a woman named Lily Johnson called Disability Pride. So I welcome you to come and see the many different pieces. The other thing that we have done is we work with the Department of Cultural Affairs in special events to bring in artists if residents to the building. If we announced her name on Friday, Ariana Granados, who is phenomenal. She's a Latina woman with a disability who likes to use multimedia to combat society, and I'm so excited to see what she's going to do. And then my team and I also work with DKs in many other events within the city to increase accessibility. So those are just some of the many ways. And thank you for the question.
Thank you, Commissioner. Clayton Pryor, I see your question about funding and available resources. I'm going to ask her to direct that to you later so she can talk about those fundings, but I did want you to know I saw your question. So this is going to be our last question. Amanda, you can bring our other goodies over as well. Deborah Gittler, are you here? Yay! So this is a lot. It's a kind of it's about gun violence and what opportunities do we have with people with disabilities. Their emerging work and outreach of gun violence seems to be ignored within the disability communities. Chicago is investing lots of money in outreach, but what about those with disabilities? What are your thoughts? And I am going to have that be the final question, and then we will finish up our program. Thank you so much, Commissioner.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for the question. I agree. I think there is so much that we need to do to serve victims of current community violence who become disabled, and so that my staff here is a parade person and providing services and serving victims with who become disabled. But I also now have better support. The Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities received a grant from the United States Justice Department to serve women with disabilities who experience domestic violence, and we will be able to hire for that early next year. And I'm just really appreciative that we could have better support to better serve women with disabilities who experience gender-based violence. And then we also have an earmark from Senator Duckman to serve exactly this population, people with disabilities who acquire a disability as a result of current community violence. We're working in partnership with Mayor Lightfoot, with so many other city departments who are devoted to them and helping people can access the resources. And one message I want to take away is that because you acquire a disability, your life is not over. There is a grieving process. You may always grieve depending on your person, but you have opportunities. So we have support services. For example, at the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, we have a personal assistance program that can help you provide up to 6 hours of assistance in your home. And then we also have a home modification program run by Mark here that can help make a home more accessible, including artisans, bathrooms, and kitchen. So we have resources. If we want people to know they can come to us to help find resources in community. And I know that there are some other partners working at this Access Living, for example. And I know that equality is working at some other aspects too. So I think together we could really help to serve people so they know their lives are not over. They're just turning in a different way.
Who was the person from the office? I think Commissioner just mentioned a staffer. Could you put your hand up? I know you're over here somewhere. There you are. Can you stand up? Because I have a feeling that there are people who want to talk to you after. So just, what's your name? Shalette Parham. So write that down. Never say City Club doesn't give you access. So I think that we all just need to give the commissioner one more round of applause. I don't know that there is anyone in the room who is not touched by a disability, seen or silent. I can't imagine how you can't be, that has not been educated by a little bit more today. I know that I certainly have learned more in the last 45 minutes, and I thought I really knew something. So there goes that, right? So Commissioner, we can't thank you enough. I am not going to belabor the time anymore.